The Ford Mustang, an iconic American muscle car known for its powerful performance, racing heritage, and just straight up bodying anyone who happens to be next to it while leaving a cars and coffee. Outside of the Mustang's notoriety in movies and motorsport, it has also earned a few other titles, most commonly known as the crowd killer. So why in the world has the Ford Mustang become the poster child for those who seem to love board sliding their frames on curbs and crowd surfing any nearby collective of people? Well, today we're gonna get to the bottom of this and look into the possible scientific reason as to why these cars are the way that they are. Now, we've all seen the videos, the compilations, the memes, but if we want to get down to the bottom of why these cars seem to have this curse set upon them, we need to start from the beginning. When did this all start? Has it been since the Mustang was put in production, or is it narrowed down to a certain generation of the car? Starting off, we need to take one key thing into consideration here. For about the past decade or so, we all carry this neat little thing called a cell phone with us 24/7. Now, this phone also happens to have a camera, which allows us to record anything at a moment's notice. And when did we start seeing all these videos of Mustangs playing human bowling start to come around? Around the same time. Now, unless your family was telling stories about their favorite cars and coffee moments, we weren't really exposed to any of this until the age of smartphones and social media was in full swing. And once that happened, these videos just started getting uploaded and shared all over the place, and we started to realize that there was something going on with the Ford Mustang specifically, and it was starting to become almost a common occurrence. Now, a lot of these videos will feature the newer Mustangs. Ones like the S550 generation are arguably the most guilty platform when it comes to this entire topic. But they're not alone. Pretty much anything from the SN95 all the way up to the brand new S650 will find its way into one of these compilation videos at some point or another, meaning that this problem spans even wider than just one generation. So, what is it with these cars? Now, there are a lot of theories out there when it comes to the Ford Mustang and some of the factors that might play into why these things have trouble keeping their nose pointed in one direction. The first one being the solid rear axle that most of these cars have. Now, outside of the Cobra from '99 to 2004, the Ford Mustang featured a simple solid rear axle setup, all the way up until the launch of the S550 in 2015. This is because they were cheap, they were simple. Pretty much every car at the time was using this type of suspension back in the day, and Ford basically said, "F it, why fix what's not broken?" And while this setup did have its advantages, it also had its disadvantages. Unlike most modern vehicles with independent rear suspension that allows each wheel to react to the surface differently and independently, a solid rear axle will affect both rear wheels at the same time, meaning that if a bump or something is hit with the driver's side wheel, it will also affect the passenger side wheel, which can ultimately lead to a loss of traction or oversteer. The second factor that can play into this phenomenon is the fact that a limited slip differential was an optional component in a lot of Mustangs, meaning that not all of them had it. Having a limited slip differential gives you way more control in the event of an oversteer, as it will provide more power to whichever drive wheel has more grip. Without a limited slip differential, if you get into the situation where you're breaking traction, it will only be one of the drive wheels, which can easily send you into a spin. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. I just mentioned before that most of these videos feature an S550 generation Mustang, but the S550 has independent rear suspension and a limited slip differential, so what the hell? While that is true, it's important to remember that we have hit an era where cars are getting bigger, heavier, and they come out of the box with more power than ever before. We're talking about hundreds of horsepower difference between generations of these cars. And not to mention, when you get into the performance trims like the GT350 and GT500, that pack even more of a punch. And when you put the pedal to the metal while turning right at an intersection, odds are you're going to break the tires loose. And if you're not prepared for it, things can escalate pretty damn quick, which overall leads me to believe that the answer here really isn't that deep. Sure, there may be some physical and scientific, mechanical reasons that can play a role into all this. However, let's take a moment to step back and look at what the Ford Mustang actually is as a whole. It is a mass-produced rear-wheel drive performance car. Since 1994, over 3 million Ford Mustangs have been sold in the United States, meaning that these things are by no means hard to get a hold of. And for the most part, you can pick one up for relatively pretty cheap. The long story short, these are very obtainable cars, and when you pair that with a 5-liter V8 that's pushing over 400 horsepower like the S550, you end up with a very interesting formula. Now, I know the internet has conditioned you into thinking that anything less than 500 horsepower is like slow and irrelevant, but that's simply not the case. These cars are making decent horsepower, there's no doubt about it, and even more torque, which can get away from your control really quick. So when you mix this in with someone who's all jacked up on caffeine and sugar from the free Dunkin' Donuts at 8 a.m., it's no wonder why we see so many of these things happening. Now, I think it's fair to say that we've all been there and have done stupid stuff with our own cars, especially when you throw a peer pressure element into it. The thing is, most of us when we were younger were doing that in like a Dodge Neon or the most boring version of a 2G Eclipse you can get your hands on, which was really hard to get yourself into trouble with. However, when you switch that drivetrain around and add a bunch more horsepower and the other things that we mentioned before, you wind up with thousands of 30-minute compilations of these cars being sent into a ditch. And unfortunately, I don't see this stigma of these cars dying off anytime soon, since it just continues to happen over and over again. Which brings us to the final part of this video. As much fun as it is to poke fun at Mustangs and the memes surrounding them, it can be a serious thing. Innocent people have fallen victim to many of these instances. So if you do find yourself behind the wheel of one of these cars, be smart about it. You can still have fun with them. Just understand where you're at, what your surroundings are like, and if you've never driven a car like that before, maybe, don't just mash the throttle all the way to the floorboard when the front wheels are turned. That can honestly go for really any car, but especially these ones. But we'd love to know your thoughts down in the comments below, and if you have a Mustang that hasn't written itself off yet and you're looking for some aftermarket parts for it, don't forget you can mod your car at Martini Works.